Welcome back to Interview Ninja Step 72. We're going to continue helping Corbin to develop his social intelligence. And as part of that, we're going to talk about the subject of ethics, and in particular countries or nations and their rights. What makes the rules? Who makes the rules? Is it might or right? Is it nature, red in tooth and claw, or is it something else? Then we'll talk about disputes at country level over resources like fish, oil, water, land, and so many other things. And where is the moral high ground? Forming your own opinions and who to believe is really important, and it will possibly be part of an interview. They may be interested in what are your values and your approach to society, because particularly in the commercial world, that can be important to the kind of activities you get involved in and the level of passion that you can engage with those activities. Companies like to employ people with a broad perspective, but who care about what that particular company does. And some companies even have things like mission statements. So if you are going for an interview, you would be well advised to find out how ethical is that company? Does it care? And do you want to be working for them?
And it's one of the most fabulous parts of the world that there is. Mm. And the general Californian ethos, apart from Los Angeles, is it's sublime. They are in harmony with nature. And apart from the Silicon Valley thing, but most of the people who live in California are very chill and sublime, and the harmony with nature is gorgeous to experience. I could live there at the drop of a hat. I really, really could, if it weren't for the fact that they don't have a healthcare system. It's a rapacious attitude to health. People getting sick is seen as a business opportunity, which is pretty counter to the way we see it. It's almost bringing us back to social attitudes.
And then my final stop, one more, is Iceland.
Okay.
But only for however long I wanted. I think we're scheduled there for like 2 days, like a night or something. So not very long. Been there, done that.
Again,
we spoke about stopping over there
with the airplanes.
Yes.
Yeah. Just to capture that briefly, in the old days before the planes had a range of more than 1,000 miles, we used to set off from Galway in Ireland, just about reach Iceland with an empty tank, and then go the next 1,000 miles to Newfoundland, fill up the tank, and then fly down New York. Advice as you fly across is, depending on time of day,
check out the Northern Lights.
If it's at night, and if it's not, get yourself a window seat if you can, and just look at, if it's a northerly route.
Absolutely, yeah.
Check out the ice fields and everything like that. They're spectacular. Wonderful things to see. I don't know Iceland. I would say what's interesting about Iceland is, again, going back only 15 years or so, a bunch of people. Iceland has a population. I don't know what it is. The population
is tiny, like 30. I'm joking.
It's a small population.
Yeah.
So you think of it as like Bristol.
Yeah.
Population, and a small group of people.
Funny to think of it. Yeah.
That's the reality. Yeah. So if you're Prime Minister of Iceland, it's like being Mayor of Bristol or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, Bristol may be bigger, I don't know. But what happened there was they became a banking centre. Jersey.
I've read a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a small group of people.
Credit crunch.
Yeah, and they were offering, when normal banks were offering 4 or 5%, the Icelandic banks were offering 7%. So a lot of people put their money on deposit in Icelandic banks because they thought they were going to get 7%.
Very few young people have any idea at all about money and the role of economies and banking. But it is vital that you learn it, and when you go for an interview, people will expect you to have at least some idea of value in terms of money. So developing social intelligence includes raising awareness of the role of money in a society. In a small country like Iceland, the wheeling and dealing of the banks can have a real impact on the local citizens. In larger countries, the banks can do pretty much what they want, get individually rich, and if things go wrong, they can legally walk away. Iceland named and shamed the bank directors and even sent some of them to prison. We've been talking about China also. In China, the crime of embezzlement, which is a kind of other word for fraud, is actually still a capital offence, and people can be executed and are executed. Since the invention of the internet, along with cash machines, nearly all financial crime is done in the virtual world. People don't walk into banks and rob them so much. It's much more people calling you up and conning you into parting with your money. So as a young person, you need to be really alert to all the scams and fraudulent systems that are going on, because they're very, very clever, and unless you're on the alert, you will lose everything you've worked so hard to get. The crimes of fraud and embezzlement go almost completely unpunished, and they're what's called white-collar crimes. So if you look at the prison population, there's hardly anybody that's involved in white-collar crimes, and it's nearly all people from very underprivileged backgrounds who, to some extent, have been driven to crime as their only option. Not that I approve of crime at all, I don't. But when you go to some of these poorer countries, it is a very high risk factor, especially in places like Latin America and some parts of Africa.
And then when the credit crunch happened, it went belly up. So the country became bankrupt as a country. And how they handled that and the recovery plan
Was poor.
No, they
Was it
handled
not?
it brilliantly.
I thought, oh well.
I think what they did was brilliant. That first of all, they put the real exploiters in prison.
That was what I thought. I thought it was that the real exploiters kind of got away with this until someone else stepped in and locked them up.
Well, in the end,
Yeah.
the community of Iceland, I think they handled it brilliantly.
Really?
So that's a big tick in my box for Iceland.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to use Iceland as a sample case for the general concept of national territory, which is a global issue. Since civilization began, most wars have been about which country owns which resource, or the rights to do something like trading, or in this case, fishing, which may seem daft, but it's a big issue, and it's going on today on the news to do with fishing rights between the UK and Europe. And all sorts of crazy things are coming out of it.
Go back 50 years,
Yeah.
right, to Iceland,
Yeah.
and nearly all the countries in the world had free fishery zones around the borders of their country.
Yes, I do remember
And it was like 5 or 6 miles or something, which was your fishing limit. And so other countries couldn't come and fish in your waters. And that had been going on for, who knows how long, 100 years or whatever. Yeah. And then Iceland, off their own bat, because their economy was so dependent on fishing, decided that they were going to draw a different line, which was 12 miles. And they said, nobody else can come and fish in our 12-mile area. And if you send trawlers in there, then we'll sink them. So, and our fishermen, whatever you call them, who'd been used to fishing closer to Iceland, and that said, well, screw that, we're going to do it. So you actually had a face-off between Icelandic Navy boats and British Navy boats about our boats could go into their fishing zone. And it was called the Cod Wars, because the main fish that people used to catch was cod.
Yeah.
Cod. Yeah, so it was called the Cod Wars.
Did anyone actually die?
I don't know, I think one or two boats, what the Icelandics used to do is they would send their boat in with guns and arrest the trawlers and take them back to Iceland and hold them there and empty out any catch they'd got.
To them, yeah.
Yeah, and basically say, we're going to keep your boat unless you agree to go away and not fish in our waters. Yeah. And it was kind of a real face-off. And I think it was really, really early days of European influence. And Iceland's very tied in with Scandinavia, and there were other geopolitical forces. This is kind of a mini geopolitical war.
Mm.
Nothing compared to the geopolitics of Russia and China and America, but it was our little geopolitical war.
Things like human rights and national rights and fairness, individual fairness, and so on, are all artificial constructs thought up by human societies. The general subject is called ethics. Now, ethics doesn't actually exist at all in the natural world, or hardly at all. If you watch animal behavior or even fish behavior, it tends to be what's called red in tooth and claw. It's survival of the fittest. And so human beings, when they wanted to live in society, have found it necessary and beneficial to invent these ethical principles. Of course, what goes wrong is who decides what is ethical. There's some really interesting stuff done by Aristotle on the ethics of Aristotle, and more lately certain religions get involved and they write down sets of rules as to what is ethical. And the China thing, which we talked about, there was the Little Red Book, and all sorts of cultures have all sorts of rules. And again, the wars come about when these artificial constructs of what is fair, what is right, are in conflict with each other. So I'm using this example of fishing rights to help Corbyn understand some of the principles about the line between might is right, what is fair, and what is reasonable. Relating this to business and job interviews and so on, in the commercial world, businesses and their trading rights and which markets they operate in and how governments seek to control the rapacious nature of some commercial organizations, it's all part of the big picture of society and something that, again, we encourage you to become informed about. What is ethical in business and the relationships between their customers and their suppliers is usually written down in the laws of a given country. And the companies dodge and weave as much as possible to avoid things like tax and make as much profit as they can. That is the nature of commerce. In some countries, it's perfectly legal for a rich person or company to buy another company that makes a particular drug, and if they can see a way of doing it, putting the price up by 5 times as much. Now that can, and often does, result in the people who depend on that drug dying. But it's perfectly legal to do it. Whereas if you did the same thing in other countries, and I have to come back to China as an example, that would be a crime against the person and you would be executed, almost definitely. So what it comes down to is things like rights and fairness and ethics are human constructs of particular cultures. They are not natural absolutes, and you have to form your own opinions as to your position on all ethical issues. In step 73, we're going to talk about how losing a battle doesn't necessarily mean you lose the war. And even if you lose a war, that doesn't necessarily mean you cannot then turn that defeat into an advantage. And history since the Second World War has many, many examples of how defeated countries have risen from the ashes, literally risen from the ashes, and become really, really successful as economies. And the examples of countries like Germany and Japan, who lost world wars and lost whole empires, is an example of resilience. Now, at an individual level, you too can develop resilience. You have to learn how to take your defeats in battle and turn them into success in a particular war, or if you lose a particular war, how you can turn that to your advantage and learn from it, because that's the key. You should always learn from all your defeats. You learn far more from defeats than you do from success.